Getting ready for this big NFC East battle on Thanksgiving, which could mean somebody's going to be in first with 4 wins. How do you see that matchup?
Yeah, somebody has got a good shot. Honestly, we've been waiting for the Philadelphia Eagles to kind of put some distance between themselves and the rest of this division, but it's not happening. And the longer it goes, the more I think somebody else is going to, emerge as a team that wins it. And just sketching out the rest of the division, it feels like somebody's going to win this division with 5 wins by the end of the season, which would just be insane. Obviously, Dallas, coming off a win against Minnesota this week, they showed that there's still at least life left in this team, particularly with Andy Dalton at quarterback. He kind of looked a bit more like we were expecting. They've got some really good weapons on that offense. And sure, the offensive line has been a bit of a mess, but Andy Dalton, with that kind of weaponry, can still be a functional NFL quarterback and still get something done and put up some points. And then the defense, it's still bad, but it's starting to show at least some signs of life, particularly guys like, DeMarcus Lawrence. Some of their best players are actually showing up now, and we haven't seen that at all for the first part of the season. So I think they're a different team now than they were, a few weeks ago when they were still reeling from the Dak Prescott injury.
Sam, how do you like the way Antonio Gibson is being deployed here in Washington? We've seen him really take the lead carries-wise. McKissic was cutting into his targets and still is out of the backfield receiving-wise. You'd like to see an uptick there, but Gibson, he's got 200-yard games under his belt at this point, really showing a lot of promise here as a rookie running back in D.C.
He is. He looks really good. I don't quite understand the McKissic thing, particularly the way they're deploying him, splitting him out from the backfield, using him as a sort of designated wide receiver matchup problem. Like, that's what Antonio Gibson is there for. He was a wide receiver in college. That's his big calling card, is that you can do those kinds of things with him. And they were earlier in the season. There were plays where they split him out wide and were giving him those kind of bubble screen plays specifically to take advantage of that kind of skill set. And they've gone away from it as the season has progressed and kind of pivoted towards McKissic for those plays. And I'm not quite sure what advantage he gives you over Gibson in that area, other than maybe pass blocking, which is one of those things that always, I think, coaches get hung up on as a problem or as a reason to make running back decisions. And it's a small part of the job, and I think it's probably to the detriment of the other things if that's what you're leaning on.
No, I saw your PFF grade. It might have been a few weeks back, and there was a chasm in the pass blocking numbers between McKissic and Gibson. So you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, but, it's definitely, I think, probably why they're doing it. But, McKissic in, 10, 11 weeks of play has lined up to pass block like 30 times, right? So if that's the reason, you're talking 2-3 times a game that is essentially causing a massive shift in the personnel that you want to deploy on offense. And you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Like, are those 2 plays a game that might not even be exposing a problem in Gibson's pass blocking worth taking him off the field for, 10, 15 snaps a game to give to McKissic instead? I would say it's probably not, and you could work around his limitations as a pass blocker, but evidently they're going the other way.
Talking to Sam Monson, who's the lead analyst for Pro Football Focus, what has PFF seen from the 3 quarterbacks that Washington has played thus far this season? Each of them have been on the field for 4 games to different extents. Of course, Alex Smith has taken over here and been the starter now. What have you seen from each of the quarterbacks? Kind of compare and contrast them by the numbers at PFF.
It's actually interesting how close they all are, and it's not necessarily in a good way. They've all been, I think, fairly conservative quarterbacks. I think they have 3 of the 10 lowest average depths of target in the NFL this season, regardless of which one of them is out there. They are evidently, deliberately, consciously, not pushing the ball down the field, trying to be as efficient as possible with the underneath stuff. And that's Alex Smith's game, throughout his career. I think he has the one that's probably got the best chance of putting that together over a season and sort of getting himself back into the groove of being that player. Kyle Allen's actually been more efficient at doing it, though. They're in the same kind of ballpark in terms of yards per attempt, but Kyle Allen has been a little bit more accurate. has been a little bit more efficient doing that, hasn't made the same volume of mistakes, though what we've seen from Kyle Allen in the past would suggest that those are just around the corner if he did have, a longer run at it. So, yeah, it's not been a great rosy outlook for quarterback in Washington so far this year.
Let's turn to last night's game. What did you see from Tom Brady? I know I was seeing one of your tweets. Look, on the other side of the ball, the Rams were throwing the ball over the field. Goff threw a couple of picks, but Kupp and Woods were getting open all the time. I know you're super high on Kupp. But what do you see from Tom Brady's play?
It wasn't good. I mean, we've seen this from Tom Brady a couple of times this season now, that I think when the platform is good, when the offensive line is in good shape and it's not allowing any pressure, he can stand back there and he can still deal with the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But when it isn't, and when he starts to feel some pressure, he just starts airmailing these passes to nowhere. And we saw that a couple of times yesterday. These balls just fluttered down the middle of the field to a safety, not even in the direction of his receiver as much as the direction of the wide open safety that he didn't account for in the play. And yeah, that's something you wouldn't expect to see from Tom Brady, even when under a degree of pressure. And he was reminding me yesterday of Kirk Cousins, where it just looks like the second things start to go wrong. It's not. And it's when, the second things start to go wrong and unspool for him, what's coming. Like, it's just inevitable that there will be a bad play and an ugly quarterback performance just around the corner. And that's kind of what we were seeing, except obviously Tom Brady comes with the pedigree of the championships and not expecting that from it.
Joined by Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus. Give him a follow on Twitter at PFF_Sam. Let's take a look at the matinee game on Thanksgiving in just a couple days. I think Detroit, they just look completely lifeless in their loss to the Panthers. They're limping to the end here. I think the Texans are going to come in and just put a beating on them on Thanksgiving with Watson, Cooks, and Fuller. We know that secondary in Detroit has struggled. They tried to upgrade it with Jeff Okudah, drafting him high at number 3 this offseason. He's struggled, as have a lot of the other rookie corners this year. How do you see Texans-Lions unfolding?
I certainly wouldn't argue with your analysis. I think what Detroit showed against Carolina was pretty miserable, and the kind of game that, if you're an owner, would shock you to the point of asking some pretty serious questions about everybody in that building. Carolina, that was a team that conceded 46 points the week before to Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and you couldn't score on them. So, yeah, that was ridiculous by the Detroit Lions. Their defense has been a concern all season long. They've tried to go to this man-heavy scheme and bring in all the horses to get it done, and it just hasn't happened. They haven't had the players capable of executing that. And it's been, I think, made look even worse this season by this explosion in passing offense throughout the NFL everywhere. I think that scheme is more exposed against this kind of offensive explosion than others, and it just makes everything look worse. Like a guy like Okudah has looked, completely lost, really hasn't made any plays to offset the bad plays that he's been beaten with. And on the other side, you've got Deshawn Watson, who actually is playing arguably the best football of his career without DeAndre Hopkins, only, it's not as obvious because the Texans are losing a lot of games. So, yeah, I think Deshaun Watson is going to be pretty tough to stop by this Lions defense. And I'm kind of with you. I think it should be a fairly comfortable win for them.
So, Sam, I saw that you compared Taysom Hill to Steve Young 2.0. How surprised were you by his play, and what can we expect? They've got the Broncos this week. I think that's a Sunday 4:25 kick.
And the Falcons again.
Critically,
after that.
Critically, it wasn't me that compared him to Steve Young 2.0. That was his coach, Sean Payton. So I'm merely, using his own joke on Twitter. I'm not the responsible for Steve Young 2.0.
So you've lifted it.
Yes, to Sean Payton's credit, it kind of worked. Everyone's been laughing at this guy for like 2 years for the way he's been talking about Taysom Hill. Nobody was more invested in him not looking bad than Sean Payton, and he didn't. He executed an offense well. He added a dimension because of the running threat that obviously Drew Brees doesn't bring. And clearly the Saints can win games and against good teams with him as a quarterback. And I think that's an interesting lesson for them. Now, it doesn't mean he was flawless, and there were, the two deep passes that he attempted were pretty miserable. I mean, the first one was underthrown by 15 yards.
Yeah.
The second one was also underthrown by 15 yards, still wound up as a touchdown before they took it off the board for a holding call. But for a guy that has an arm as strong as him, they need to figure out why he can't throw the ball deep down the field. I think it's a combination of, a timing and a read issue, and there's something not right mechanically with that
He might
as
have
well.
too much muscle. That's my theory. It's stupid. It's not analytics. Have you ever seen a quarterback that jacked?
Yeah, but the last one was Brady Quinn, and people were saying the same thing about him.
So maybe there is something to be said for it.
There you go.
Be. It could be. Yeah, because that was the only downside I really thought I saw. The deep balls were atrocious, but he could throw on the run. He's obviously athletic and we know what he can do with his legs and his power. And he can make the intermediate throws.
Hey, he gave Michael Thomas some fantasy life, and Michael Thomas has been disappointing this year.
Right. Yeah, I was surprised. I have to say, pleasantly surprised. What have you seen from Antonio Brown in his 3 games back? I hate to go back to the Bucs, but it's kind of intriguing. He's got 18 catches, but nothing yardage-wise really to speak of.
Yeah, I think he's looked good. I think that entire offense is still a work in progress in terms of the route concepts that they're using, in terms of the structure of the plays. They're trying to mesh this Bruce Arians system with what Tom Brady has been doing for 20 years and find some kind of happy medium between the two. And I don't think they've quite got there yet, particularly with the offensive line struggling as much as it has since they lost Ali Marpet a couple of weeks ago. They're just working through these issues right now. And it's a tough spot because realistically they want to have worked them out by the time they hit the postseason. But if they spend too long working them out, they might not even make the postseason.
Right, and the truth is the numbers sometimes can be misleading. That's why PFF doesn't look necessarily at the results but the process, because there was a deep ball, I think it was the fourth quarter, that Brady hit his fingertips, and that could have been,
right.
If it's, 6 inches, maybe a foot closer to Antonio Brown, that may be a long touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Antonio Brown has been open. He has looked like a guy that hasn't been sitting out of the game for a while. Antonio Brown left this game as arguably the best receiver in it, right up there with Julio Jones. I don't think we've seen anything from him since his return to suggest that there's been a massive drop-off during the time he hasn't been playing.
Sam, if you had to bet, we've been talking about this. You had to bet right now. There's 6 games remaining. Who takes the NFC East?
Oh, man, the last time I sketched this out, I thought the Giants would do it, if just because right now Daniel Jones is the best quarterback in the division, as wild as that is to say.
So you're sticking with it, the Giants.
He doesn't believe it, though,
yeah.
but he's saying it. He sounds
saying
skeptical.
I don't believe in any team in the NFC East.